Can you do that one more time?
I am Beth Herrington, public school educator in Tahlequah for 48 years.
All right, great. So let's start. Were you raised in Tahlequah?
No, I came here as a 17-year-old. I was born in Washington County, north of Tulsa, and grew up in Mays County, Locust Grove to the north. And in Oklahoma, we talk about counties, of course, because in the big cities, they don't know counties from what. But in Oklahoma, we're a new enough state that we know about counties.
All right. What do you recall about your childhood?
Oh my, I had a wonderful childhood. I was a child of the Depression, and of course that wasn't in Tahlequah. I was a child of the Depression. My parents were teachers, and they had gone into business, and I never remember wanting for anything. My parents said, oh my goodness, everybody, except the millionaires, were poor during the Depression. But I had books out the gazoo. I had dolls and paper dolls, and my parents doted on me. I was an only child, and I could have children come to the house to play anytime they wanted to, and I had dogs and cats. What could be a happier childhood?
So what was school like when you were?
I loved school. My teachers, as I think back in grade school and high school, and then of course my undergraduate degree is from Northeastern, and the educators were all wonderfully prepared. I had wonderful men and women both who were educators. One of the men who was my fifth grade teacher, I believe it was the older brother of a girl who became a very good friend of mine when I came to college as a 17-year-old here. And he was the funniest man, tall and thin, and at that time, men and women both dressed professionally. Suits, starched shirts, ties, and he was always wanting some of us in the fifth grade classroom to clean the blackboards, not a whiteboard or any of the things that we do now. And then he was always grumpy if we stood in his teacher's chair because he was afraid it was going to get the seat of his suit pants dirty.
So what do you remember best about your parents?
My parents were very different from each other, but the most loving people and educated people. My mother's ancestry was New England. She was from Kansas, and she was a teacher. My dad's ancestry was from North Carolina, Kentucky, and Mississippi, and they met here at the school when it was a normal school because they were both teaching. And what a contrast. I loved my parents. My dad was when he said, honey, don't do that, he never raised his voice. I don't recall him ever saying a harsh word. I didn't do it. My mother was very dynamic and waved her hands around a lot like I do. And it was, they were a diverse couple, and they say opposites attract, and I guess that's right.
So do you have any siblings?
No, I have no siblings.
So what did you do in your spare time?
Oh, I always read, but I'm also a musician. My mother was a musician, and so I started piano before I was 5, and she taught me as long as she could. And then I had a teacher in the county seat town of Mays County, and then I had a double major as an undergraduate, piano and music education, and then went on to do a master's degree in music, and then followed that up at that was in Peabody in Nashville, and then followed it up at the University of Tulsa. So in my spare time, I was either practicing piano or reading books or playing with my paper dolls at a younger age.
With the Peabody, that's when I grew up in Nashville. I moved here from Nashville. So.
Oh, well, my master's degree. See, you're young. That was back in 1954 when I received my master's degree, and George Peabody College was an independent school.
Right.
Now, of course, it's one of the colleges.
Right.
And it's tops in educational research. It was then. It was a wonderful school. We had the lecture series. I had my piano instructor was of German. He was from Germany and was educated in the schools in Germany. Wonderful musician. Dr. Irving Wolf was the chairman of the music department. That was a marvelous experience.
Oh, great. So do you got any traditions that you carried over from like your childhood, like holiday type things?
Well, and my mother was an excellent cook. I don't do that, but I make friends with excellent cooks, and and it's important on holidays to, since I don't have family, I have lots of friends, and it's important we get together. Friends get together. That's a tradition that, and we don't. And I don't blame young people. I never blame young people with things. We don't text or talk on the phone, and we have in our groups they're diverse ages, and we visit and we talk about lots of things.
Great. Uh, so when did you leave home?
Well, actually, I guess you could say I never left home because my parents moved here with me. They were considerably older than I. I said I had no siblings. They had lost an infant when they were been married 6 years and had no more children until I came along after they were, older. And so had just had my 17th birthday when I came to college. And so they moved down here. So essentially, I guess you could say I never left home. I've always lived where my parents lived.
All right. So coming to school, making that transition from childhood into adulthood, what do you think was the big change for you? What's the big thing you remember?
Well, my parents they never told me, they didn't manage my life. But being a doted only child, then when I went off to graduate school and then I began to look for a job and then I was responsible for what I was doing, I think the biggest change was they always wanted me to be independent. And all my life I heard, now you have to prepare yourself. Education is the way to do that. And you're going to have to be an independent woman. And brother, I am. But that was the big change, When I got into college, then those decisions were mine. When I got into my profession, those decisions were mine. And as long as my parents lived, they were glad to back me up if I needed backing up. But if I was off somewhere, why, independency, I guess.
Yeah. So how would you describe your hometown?
Tahlequah?
Yeah, I mean, like when you first came here, kind of describe it compared to Tahlequah.
Oh my goodness. There were only 4,000 people here, and it was just a little rural town. But the public school teachers with whom I became acquainted and the college faculty were from everywhere. And the philosophy was, we don't want to be ingrown and just know what's right here. There's a big world out there, and we need to know about that, and educators are responsible for doing that, and we need educators from everywhere in order to inspire young people to know about their world, not just Cherokee County.
All right. What was that? So growing up, what would you say was probably the most like a historical event that happened to you that really struck you, that you really sticks out in your mind?
Oh, goodness. I don't know, because my parents were very much into history, and we made lots of history tours when I was in high school. And then after I became a teacher, then I would take my parents, to do history all over the United States. But one of the things that I remember really well, which engendered in me, I think, an interest in helping communities and people grow. My mother's cousins had the mission of redeeming love in Tulsa, which was a mission down in the bad part of Tulsa as I was growing up. And it was a 4-story building where they took in the street people. There was preaching on the first floor. There were dormitories and a cafeteria and a laundry and everything. And I grew up going to that mission with my parents to visit. And I saw that we have a responsibility for others. I think that's a historical event that's very. And my mother and dad were, my mother and dad, before I ever came along, would go and help evangelists in that early day. They would hold meetings around, and when Mother and Dad could, that my mother was a musician and my dad could speak, and they laughed and told her one time they were with doing a meeting with an evangelist, and at the close of the meeting, my mother was playing the organ, a pump organ, and my dad was leading the singing, and a woman got hysterical, and my dad laughed and said, Dan, sing something. Sing something. I don't care what you sing. Just sing something. So I thought that was amusing.
So you say your parents were involved with that. So did religion play a huge part of your growing up?
You always went to Sunday school and church, but it wasn't religion, tied to, well, of course, there were different churches, obviously then, but it wasn't tying to a particular church that they taught me. It was a responsibility for those less fortunate than you are. People have a responsibility to help others. That's what I would say was the groundwork.
So, do you remember your grandparents?
I only knew one of my grandparents. I remember my grandmother. She died when I was my father's mother. The others had my father's father died when I was 2 months old, and my mother's parents were deceased before I was born. But I remember my grandmother, and I looked somewhat like her. Little thin arms and little wrinkled face, and well, but she was tiny, and I'm not tiny.
And where was she from?
She was actually from Arkansas, but she was on my father's side. Her people were from Kentucky and North Carolina.
Okay. So what was your first job?
My first job was my parents had opened a business after they didn't teach anymore, and it was the first dime store in Locust Grove, which is in Mays County up north of here, and it was a dime store, and there was a candy counter, and my first job was to sit at the candy counter on Saturdays and sell candy, and I also gave piano lessons.
Right, great. That's pretty much covers the questions we have. Is there anything you would like to just kind of talk about? Or?
I just think that our younger generation need to carry on the tradition of knowing about their history, their genealogy, and that education is so important. It doesn't necessarily have to be a master's degree, but they need to educate themselves so that they can work competently in a changing society, and they also need to have a feeling for others. We all have a responsibility here.
Right.
And sometimes, and I'm not on to young people, sometimes people of my generation didn't feel that way, but we ought to.
All right, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.